Avoir. Hello, everybody. My name is Leah Lodato. I'm the host of the show. Thank you so much for tuning in and checking out FitPet Boston Talks. Today, I'm going to do a short explanation/expose on water and the importance of water as it pertains to your dog. Today's Patriots Day, so I'm doing this little remote episode, and I'm just so excited. I love Patriots Day. I love watching the Boston Marathon on TV. I go there in person whenever I possibly can. It's one of my favorite events, and it's a very special day in the city. And I realized this weekend, after visiting some relatives in New Jersey, that not everybody celebrates Patriots Day. It's apparently only celebrated here in the great state of Massachusetts. But again, it's one of the iconic holidays. It's also one of the days that's special on my calendar because my family always opens the family farm stand on Patriots Day. So if you're in Hudson, Mass, and you want to check out for Julian Farms, my sister is doing tulip picking today because the tulips are in full blast, full bloom because it's been really warm out. So they do like pick your own tulips, super fun family activity and event. If you are out that way and you want something fun to do on your day off, check it out. And if you're hearing this after the fact, check it out anyway, because they do tulip picking for the next couple of weeks. And in the summertime, it's pretty cool too. They have a really nice cutting garden. So if you're interested in having your own flowers picked on the regular, and if you're interested in arranging your own flowers, it's just a fun activity. So Patriots Day has always been twofold for me. It's the Boston Marathon, that iconic event, and also the opening of the farm stand, which historically is always like a dreary day. And I think today it's going to be a pretty dreary day as well. So at any rate, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. I am going through a book on canine and feline nutrition that I had bought years ago. And I had gone through the book, it's probably been 6 or 7 years at this point, and I'm going through it again. And it's a great book. It's kind of like a textbook, but it is written as a resource for companion animal professionals. So I think it's a little bit more accessible than a flat out textbook, although it is really nuanced when it comes to explaining how a dog and a cat digests food. And I personally think that if you are a trainer or a handler who likes to make food recommendations or tries to help your clients when it comes to your dog's diet, I think as a trainer or handler, it's good for you to know just the basics of how a dog digests food and what the components of food are, right? So understanding water, fat, carbs, protein, vitamins, and minerals. Super important for you to understand how a dog metabolizes those items if you are going to go ahead and give your clients dog food advice, which people love to give dog food advice. I've realized this after going down certain rabbit holes on social media. However, if you're giving dog food advice, it's good to know the basics, right? It's good to know the basics. So educate yourself. I will put a link to the book that I read in the highlight reel on the Instagram page for the podcast. So if you follow at FPB Talks on Instagram, I have a little highlight reel there on resources. So if you hear certain things in podcast episodes, I do my best to get them out there on the highlight reel. Not great at it because we've done a ton of episodes and the content is a little bit overwhelming, but if I mention it moving forward, it will be on the highlight reel. Okay, so if we are to have a discussion about water and the importance of water, water is so essential for survival, right? So I'm just going to read a couple sentences straight out of this book. Although animals can live after losing almost all of their body fat and more than half of their protein, a loss of only 10% of body water results in death. Approximately 70% of lean adult body weight is water, and many tissues in the body are composed of between 70 and 90% water. And this is a fact that we're taught from a young age, right? The importance of water in a human diet because our bodies are primarily made up of water. The big difference between a human and a dog, I mean, there are many differences, let's face it, between humans and dogs, but the big difference in terms of water and how we utilize water, I think, is the fact that dogs do not have sweating ability, right? So as a human, we are able to sweat to cool ourselves off and regulate our body temperature. So when it gets warm, when our body temperature rises, we sweat, and that sweat cools on the surface of our skin and cools our body temperature down and keeps our body temperature at that 98.6 degrees so that we can survive. Dogs don't have this ability, right? So they have some ability to sweat like through their paws, but they don't have the ability to sweat like humans do. So they use a different way of cooling themselves off. So as a human, it's very easy for us to understand, okay, I'm outside on a hot day. I am losing water because I am sweating. That sweat is drying and evaporating, and therefore I need to drink more water because I am losing water. And if I become dehydrated and I do not have the ability to sweat because the water is not as readily available to come to the surface of my skin and to dry, I'm going to be in trouble. So we understand that we have to drink water in order to continue that process. And obviously we have to drink water for other reasons just to keep ourselves going. But in terms of thinking about drinking water when it's warm out, that's primarily the mentality that we have to have, right? We're sweating. The harder we're working in hot weather, the more we're going to sweat, the more we are going to be needing to replenish that water. So if we think about dogs and their ability to self-regulate their temperature, they do that in a different way. But just because they do that in a different way doesn't mean that they don't need water in order to stay hydrated, because their process of cooling themselves off is via panting. And panting is one of the things that I have known in the back of my mind, like, okay, dogs pant to cool off. But I didn't necessarily understand why panting cools a dog off. So what is it about that process of quickly and intensely bringing air in and pushing air out? What is it about that process that cools a dog down? Well, the process of bringing air inside the lungs that's cooler than the temperature of their body is that air itself is cooling the body off. It's reducing the body's temperature when it gets above that 101, 102, which is a dog's internal temperature. So if the air around is cooler than the dog's body temperature, they will be able to cool themselves off via panting, which is pretty cool. The more they pant, the more they're able to cool themselves off, as long as that air temperature is cooler than their body temperature. So that's why it's so important to limit your dog's exercise when you're outside and it's really hot, because a dog cannot self-regulate their temperature like we can through sweating. So let's say it's 100 degrees outside. If we are properly hydrated, we can cool ourselves off via sweating and keep our body temperature regulated as long as we are hydrated. A dog is not going to be able to do that. So if a dog is outside and they're working in 100 degrees, and not even 100 degrees, in 90 degrees, right? Because their body is already trying to work to stay cool. And just working itself to stay cool, it's generating heat, right? If they're out in 90 degrees, that air temperature is way too close to their body temperature for them to be able to self-regulate their body temperature if they are working, right? So the thing to remember, and the thing that I've been reminded of by reading this book again, and it was funny because I had already had it highlighted in this book. It's so interesting to go back on things that you've read, right? And see where your mind was at years ago. But Reading right from the book regarding panting. Panting substantially increases respiratory water loss and thus heat loss. Because of these mechanisms of temperature regulation, water losses from respiration and evaporation during hot weather can be very high in dogs. So if it's hot out and your dog is panting a lot, they are using water through that respiratory process to cool themselves off. So as their lungs are expanding and contracting, that whole process is utilizing water, and your dog will become dehydrated if they don't replenish that water supply. Another really interesting thing, because of its high specific heat, water is able to absorb the heat generated by metabolic reactions with a minimal increase in temperature. So if your dog is doing work, right, and metabolizing energy, because they're using water to metabolize that energy, the water itself, by nature of how water is, isn't heating up. So as your dog is doing that work and using that water, the water isn't holding on to that energy, which is pretty cool. So if your dog is well hydrated and they are using that water in the process of metabolizing energy, they're not necessarily heating up because of the nature of water. Okay, so as long as they have that bioavailable to them, they'll be cool. No pun intended. But I thought that was a really interesting point as well. So water loss via panting is going to require your dog to rehydrate after activity, which makes sense because we put the dog back in the van after we're done, working out or whatever, or going on a walk. They're drinking water. If anything, depending on your dog's breed, you have to kind of pay attention to how much water they're drinking because, you're like, whoa, slow down. You're going to puke in here once we hit the dusty trail. So, decreasing the air temperature after your dog works. So by either putting them in the shade or turning the AC on in the car and hitting the road, rehydrating is going to be really important. But again, I think it's good to know why that is, right? So panting in and of itself is using water. Okay. It's not something that I even ever thought of, right? Because we think about water loss via drool or sweat. And neither one of those things are happening with our dogs. I mean, some dogs drool, but none of my dogs do. Okay, so another really cool thing that was highlighted in this book's chapter on water is that water is an essential component in normal digestion because it's necessary for hydrolysis, which is the splitting of large molecules into smaller molecules through the addition of water. And then the book goes on to talk about how adding water to your dog's dog food can assist with the process of hydrolysis before the dog food is ingested. And this is something that we've talked about on the podcast before. So we feed our dogs kibble. Judge us if you want. I really don't care. They do very well on kibble. And we'll add stuff to their kibble, raw food, an egg, salmon skin. Ruben loves salmon skin. But the majority of their calories come from a balanced, higher quality dog kibble. And we add water to their kibble before they ingest it. Now, I have seen on social media countless different reasons why this is a good practice and why this is a bad practice. I've heard numerous different opinions about this practice of adding water to kibble. One of the things that people say is that it reduces the chances of your dog getting bloat. And that's something that you probably will never hear me say because it's just, to me, like that's a hard thing to prove, right? If you have like a barrel-chested big dog and you feed them and then they do an activity and their stomach flips, to me, the catalyst for that happening was the dog doing activity, or the dog jumping up, or the dog, or it being a complete fluke, right? I personally don't think adding water to the food makes a ton of difference because some dogs are susceptible to that condition. So to me, it's really important that if your dog is eating all of their food and they're doing it, quickly, or if you're feeding your dog just once a day and you have a large dog, it's very important to have them rest in their crate for a while after they're done eating so that their stomach can begin to push some of that food along their digestive tract and reduce the chances of that happening, right? Some people don't like adding water to their food because they say that it causes bacteria to start to form on the food, which is true. If you leave the water and let it sit there, bacteria is going to start to grow because dehydrated dog kibble is wicked dry, right? Very low moisture. The reason why I like to add water to the dog kibble is exactly the reason why the book explains how water influences molecule breakdown, right? So water will start to break down the molecules in the dog kibble that are water soluble. So they call this hydrolysis, right? The water starts to break down the kibble. Dog kibble being relatively difficult to digest, and the book goes on to talk about not the pros and cons of kibble versus wet food or real food, but dog kibble is very dense and nutritionally dense, and it's made to be portable, and it's made to last and not to have to be refrigerated and such. And as a result, the nutrients in dog kibble are not as readily available to a dog because the digestive process is a little bit more intense and a little bit different than if your dog were to digest real food, okay? So if we can aid the digestion process by adding water to the kibble to start that hydrolysis before the dog eats the food, it provides less work for the digestive tract. It's just a fact. The digestive tract does not have to break down as much as they would if the water wasn't added and the hydrolysis didn't start before the dog ingested the food. Additionally, if a dog is not one to drink much water during the day, and there are some, like dogs are way better at doing this than cats are, for example. But if a dog is not one to drink a lot during the day, it's a good way to add water to their diet, is to add a little bit of water to their food. But those are the three things, I guess, that I really wanted to highlight in this episode about water. So we need to rehydrate our dogs, especially as we're heading into summer, right? It's Patriots Day today. Last week we had like a few 90-degree days, right? And there's no shade in the woods yet because the leaves haven't even popped out on those trees. So I got completely fried sunburned on, I think, Thursday and Friday of last week because I was in the woods and I thought to myself, I don't need to put sunscreen. When I'm in the woods, I don't get hit by the sun. And it was like being at the beach in those woods because it was just so sunny because there's just no leaves on those trees. And the dogs, they were hot, and I shortened up the walks by 5-10 minutes because I didn't anticipate that happening. But rehydrating your dogs, because the process of your dog panting to cool themselves off by bringing in air that is cooler than their air temperature, that process uses, according to this book, a lot of water, okay? And the importance of water as your dog is using energy, and as we're using energy, the cool thing about water is that it does not conduct heat, right? So as our body is using that water and we are making heat, the water itself is not increasing in temperature. Again, the book says this property allows the many heat-generating reactions within the body to continue with a minimal change in body temperature. I mean, how amazing and important is that, right? Beautiful. The third thing is adding water to your dog's kibble as a way to start that hydrolysis process before the kibble hits your dog's stomach. A little bit easier on the GI and the intestinal tract. Pretty cool. So thought I would share with everybody in the audience. Again, happy Patriots Day to those of you that are here in Massachusetts. I wish the Boston Marathon runners all the best of luck. And I hope that it is a safe and celebratory day in the city. Thank you so much for listening to FitPet Boston Talks. The best thing you can do for the show is to share and subscribe to the show if you're interested in what you are hearing. Again, thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for commenting and for engaging with this show. It means the world to me. And we will see you next time.